Welcome to Translating Poetry Between Authenticity and Creativity. And mostly this is just going to be like a discussion here. So we look forward to also hearing from anyone in the audience. If you have questions or thoughts on the themes, that would be fabulous. I am really pleased to be here. My name's Lisa Passold. I'm Canadian. I'm from Montreal originally. I lived in Paris for a while and live in New Orleans a lot of the time. And I'm really interested in the intersections of the francophonie and translation between both French and English, and also within language, within types of English, within types of French. And I'm really lucky today. All of these people, I can say, all work within both French and English, and they all write and translate. And what I thought to get us going is we just go along and have everybody say a word or two about how you ended up doing translations at all. Where are you in this language thing?
Would you like to start, Virginie, and then
Yes, well, it all started in New Orleans, my translation. Sorry, I'm repeating myself, I'm sorry about that. But it started when I arrived here in 2000, and I discovered that I took a bath in English, in the English language, and then it never, it kind of became a passion to read American poetry, and I wanted to make it able to, for the French audience, to make them discover all the great American poets. I know there already have been a lot of people translated, but they're always wonderful and marvelous people, alive poets to translate. And I made one point when I started to translate, I decided I will only translate poets or a person who is still alive, because I wanted to interact with the person himself, and if I have questions, or if I wanted to make sure I can be as close as his intention in his poems. So that was my start. I don't know if it's too long to answer.
No, that's a perfect answer. Fantastic. Thank you.
So are we supposed to present or something? Yeah, so I'm Michelle Audubon, and I'm originally from Michigan, but I moved to Paris 35 years ago, so I've lived most of my adult life in France and in French. And for translation, I actually work as a professional translator. That's how I earn my living, not by translating poetry, because that would be a really crappy living. I work for the French audiovisual industry, so most of what I translate actually isn't poems. And I got into translating poetry because I was writing poetry, and it seemed like kind of a logical thing to do, and meeting a lot of French poets, and it just kind of came naturally as a translator and a poet to translate French poetry into English.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Hi, I'm Carrie Chappell. I am from the American Southeast. I grew up in Birmingham, Alabama. Then I lived in New Orleans here for about 7 years. And this is where I did my MFA at UNO, so I'm home in a way, because Birmingham never felt like it. And then I've been in Paris for 10 years, because I had to keep going in a linguistic sort of discovery and pursuit. And when I was doing some work, both in the UNO workshops, but also with a women's poets group that I saw a lot here in the city. Everybody's sort of in different locations now, but I was often accused, I think it was an accusation, of being a writer who went between registers in sometimes a frustrating way for readers, and that was maybe the first time that I recognized that I had this sort of in-between English that I didn't know what I was doing with, and it's been through my experience in France that I've understood what that is more, because I've been having to do that in French, because I know different levels of French from how I've had to interact with these audiences. I just don't have an ancestral sort of connection that some of my in-between Englishes from my mother to other people, other writers that were haunting my head. So I don't know, and my translation practice started more technical, for which I was very, very bad at, because I wanted to make everything poetic. And then now I'm on doing more creative work. I like working with living writers as well, but I have another project that's connected to my doctoral work. And that person has been no longer in this dimension since 2000, but I'm going to give it to Amanda now.
Hi, I'm Amanda Murphy. I'm from Columbus, Ohio, and I've lived in Paris and in France for 17 years now. My connection to translation really began with my passion for language, which was French, and very inexplicable passion that was somehow born in Columbus, Ohio, with no one around me from other countries or people in my family speaking other languages. So it's a bit of a mystery. I'm piecing it together little by little. But I came to literature really through language, and then explored, wanted to go further, kind of exploring what it means to live between languages, between spaces, between worlds, really, and made that kind of an academic project. I got really interested in translation studies, and through studying multilingual poetics and very experimental poets that work between languages, and what that could potentially do to the practice of translation, I came to the practice myself, experimenting a bit with translation as a way of reading these kind of works that are between languages. And so then also became I created my own translation business, I guess we would call it, like in France. Not a business, but I work for myself as a translator, like we all do. And did a lot of kind of academic work, and then gradually went towards more creative things. So Carrie and I have just co-translated. That's both of our first translation of a book of poetry, and I really wanted to do it with my friend who's a poet as well, to work together on that, because it's a daunting thing to translate poetry, and doing it together made it feel safer. So.
Hi, my name is Frédéric Forté. I'm a French poet, member of the Oulipo, and I'm mainly a poet, but I translated some books, and how I came to that. Different reasons. I think it's natural when you're a poet to, at some point, to want to know other languages' poetry, and there's a long tradition of poets translating other poets, because most of the time, if a poet doesn't do it, no one will. And it's a way to refresh your own language, your own poetry, to move out of the lines that a community of poets can fix in a language. And so the first time I translated was a language that I don't speak. It was the German poet Oskar Pastor, who was also a member of the Oulipo, and my publisher at the time asked me to help her to translate anagrammatic poems by Oskar Pastor. So I did what Oskar did in German, I did it in French, helped by Bénédicte Villegrain. And then I translated Michelle, because she's my partner, and I wanted to make her a surprise for her 14th birthday, and then her poetry is so good that one of my publishers wanted to publish the poems, and then I met Guy Bennett. Guy Bennett, he says Guy himself. Guy Bennett is from LA, and I read a book, Self-Evident Poems, and I just wanted this to exist in French. So I didn't care if I was not the translator. Actually, we translated it together because he's a very good French speaker. But the idea for me was to pass this American poetry in French. And most recently, it's not published yet, but I have a love for an American novelist and poet, Gilbert Sorrentino. And Sorrentino was from Brooklyn. He died in 2006. And he was translated in French, his novels, by a great translator, Bernard Hoffner, who died. And I cannot translate the novels he didn't translate at the time, but I wanted to translate some book of Sorrentino's poetry. And so I began to do that, and I learned that someone else, a woman, was doing the same. So we worked together to translate The Orangery, a book from 1978, and it will be published, the same publisher that published most of the Sorrentino novels in France. So I'm great, it's to me. I learned that a few weeks ago.
Nice, that's wonderful, thank you. What's her name?
Gilbert Sorrentino?
No, the woman who's co-translating with you.
Oh, yeah, sorry. I know we will talk about that later. So, Juliette Nicolini. She's not a professional translator, neither do I.
Mm-hmm.
She has studied Sorrentino, the color in the works of Sorrentino.
Ah, okay.
And so she's a teacher, and she's a specialist of Sorrentino, but not a translator. And so we did it together. It was very, very cool.
That actually leads well into, I've got a couple of questions for you guys, but one of them is, I really want to get into what it means to work collectively, whether it's working, as you said, you really wanted to translate living poets so you could talk with them. And I know Michel and Virginie have just finished work on a translation of Virginie's book. This is actually the postcard. The book is almost in existence and you can think about it, but you can't buy it yet because it's not quite ready. It's almost ready, it's coming, you can pre-order it. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous translation, and I was curious if, going down, we could talk a little bit, you guys maybe could discuss a bit about working together, and then Carrie and Amanda have just finished translating a book together as well, and maybe you could talk a bit about that process. And Fred and Michel, I know both of you, and I have no idea how you worked on this translations that you've done with each other. So I'm really curious, so I'm just going to pass the mic over. Go for it, guys.
Well, I guess I'll start. So if for the process of translating this, The Unlikeness of Things, which Virginie's book in French is Le Pas comme si des choses. So we did work on it together in the sense, but I translated it, and then we were able to go over it together, and that was really, that's what's so great about working with living authors, because you don't have to sit there and wonder like, oh, what is actually, what do they actually mean by that? Because you can just be like, hey, what do you mean by that? Also, it helps because we're friends. But what we did was when I worked on the translation for a long time. Last spring, we were lucky enough to put some time aside and just go and sit down and just read. I read it out loud, like next to you, and we went line by line, and Virginie was able to approve. I mean, she has a good grasp of English, obviously, and was able to approve my choices. And sometimes when, for me, it wasn't really clear, I could be like, this isn't really working in English, but I'm thinking more like this, and is that okay with you? And yeah, that's fine. And so we could actually get away from the French more than you might dare to do if you were sitting right next to the author and getting their approval for going away from that, authenticity, which I know is one of the questions you want to talk about later on. So I don't know if that answers the question.
I'm curious for Virginie, how that, what did it look like from your side of the table, so
Well,
to speak?
it looks great.
Good answer. Okay, we're done.
No, there was such a great experience. It's so where you can sit next to your translator and just agree, or most of the time I agreed actually. I barely disagreed on one or two sentences, I don't know.
We only got into it, we only did the mano a mano like once or twice.
Yeah, well, barely. No, it was really marvelous experience, because we actually dive into the text and enjoy it word after word, and try to be as close as possible as what I meant. I supposedly meant when I wrote the text. And Michel did a tremendous work about that, because I know it was not that easy to translate. But to do it like sentence after sentence, it was just a wonderful experience. So I can say you can try that, and I think that's the best way to go if you want to translate together. She did the work, I just agreed or disagreed. So it was much easier for me. So I guess.
It's
like one of the things that was interesting, I hope I'm not taking too much time with it, but one of the things that was interesting with that is sometimes, I'd realize that, we'd get to the point and I'm like, look, I don't really understand what's going on here. Like, I don't really understand this. A lot of it's a bit ekphrastic in the work, because she writes, based on images or painters and different artists, and I'm like, I'm not really getting this, and then she'd be like, oh, because here, I'm like, and she'd be able to pull up the image of Kiki Smith or whoever and show it to me, and then we could kind of come up with something in English that got maybe the seed behind of where the French came from, but get back behind that French to get to the seed of it, to bring it out in English. I guess I'm not sure if I'm expressing it well, but like to get away from what Virginie did and back to the idea of it, the root of it, and then go into English directly rather than through the French, if that makes sense.
Well, maybe we're going to share this question too. I'll start just a little bit with some of. Actually, we had a lot of contact with Sandra Moussempès, the French poet that we've translated, which is her first full-length translation into English, but it's not the first time she's been translated into English. So she had maybe other relationships that had happened. I mean, no bad news, but just other. Because translation probably doesn't do anything for payment and things like this, the translators sometimes, I guess, can take other directions and move on to either other writers or what have you. In any case, we established a kind of system, I guess, we're in the same city, but we were working, I feel like I wanted to say something more glamorous than this as a part of the story, but it's kind of like when you meet a partner or a boyfriend or a girlfriend on social media or an app. We worked online separately, and then we would have these really big seances where we would call in the spirit of Sandra and call in our own sort of ancestry, because this book is really interesting in that I think it put us, if I can speak for Amanda too, because I translate Amanda, it put us in a research of our own sisterhood to French women, because Sandra's book, Sandra, is looking back across the Atlantic to a lot of women artists, English artists, and a lot of them mostly United Statesian. And so, I don't know, we would have moments where the language, we didn't practice any sort of like trans creation. We didn't go like yards and yards or kilomètres and kilomètres far from what Sandra did on the page. We have a translator's note if you want to find out like the big leaps we took in a few spaces, the ones that we admit to. But the other thing that I guess was interesting was to watch like where either Amanda or myself felt really unsure, where we would sort of stop ourselves and say, this requires another voice, this requires consultation. And we didn't, at the very beginning, we actually invited Sandra into that conversation just because we were unsure of ourselves, and then we kind of said, actually, this is great. And she had Sandra's very busy, she writes a lot, she's got like 3 books coming out every year, and not every year, but consecutively. And so Amanda and I would talk about the phrasing, and also some things that Amanda studies had brought me into as far as thinking about translation, which I'm going to let her talk about more, but like keeping a little bit of making sure both of us too, I think we wanted there to be a Frenchness that stayed, a strangeness, or I'll let Amanda take this over because these are her researched ideas.
Thank you. I don't feel like I brought too much of my research to this, though. This felt like it was really a passion project, and it was really out of sisterhood and kinship, I think, really, with Sandra and but the idea of working on it, because there are all of these other women's voices in the book already, we kind of wanted to have that, like a plurality of voices already of both of our, so sometimes we would we translated separate parts, and then we would read each other, and sometimes we would translate together. I remember when we were trying to finish the manuscript, we sat down and really worked on it together and talked about every single word, and then went back over also every single word, sometimes interpreting the original quite differently, or and we had a lot of discussions also about just syntax, and because we don't write the same way, obviously, and I think that's interesting too, how when there are two of you, it's like you have to make concessions and compromises and accept the place of the other. So if it felt like a text that made space for a lot of different different voices. I don't know, it's homogenous in the end, I think, but we had, sorry? The light, yeah.
Really sorry for the
It is a
light.
bit of a distraction.
It's
Yeah.
horrible.
I'm trying to get a hold of
Drew's around, but I don't know where he is, so yeah, sorry about the lighting.
That's okay. What was I saying? Yeah, so also the fact that both of us are from the US, living abroad, as Carrie, I think you mentioned this idea of sometimes not being sure of your own language anymore, like living abroad for so long and not knowing, is that right? Is that English? Is that how we say it? And so having another person also allowed us to bounce off of each other that way, and to also accept sometimes those weird things and say, well, maybe that makes it sound more French, and that will remind the reader that it was actually written in French originally, and so that's okay, right? We don't have to domesticate it. We didn't want to domesticate it fully into English or a standard English necessarily. So there are places where it does sound French. Even today we opened it to try to pick some poems to read, and we're like, maybe that sounds French, oh well. Yeah, and I remember also just things that we didn't understand at all, or certain references that we sat down together and Googled and watched videos and like, listened to dubstep to be like, okay, let's get in the mood of this this poem. So it was cool.
I just want to, Virginie, I don't want to throw you into this conversation just for a moment. I'm curious how you feel about this idea of putting more French, making it sound Frencher in a translation. Do you ever feel that way about the translation that you and Michel did? Did you feel like things should sound more French in the translation, or did you want them to sound more American? And we'll come back to you guys in a second. I really like this idea, so I'm curious.
No, I really wanted it to sound it more American than French.
Okay.
Because it's for the public. I mean, the people who are going to read it, they are not French, they are American, and the references and the way what they refer to, they have to know it. Or if it's too French, sometimes we can lose them. So, I mean, it was not for this particular book. It was fine. It was not that complicated. I think about the French references, but sometimes we simplify, not simplify, but we kind of I don't know, distort it a little bit to make it work in English, and we use some I don't know how you say that, some chemin de traverse.
Yeah, kind of we went at it obliquely, maybe, rather than head on. We kind of like not shortcuts, but just not just crosscuts, maybe coming at it obliquely. I did worry about it sounding a little bit too French, and when I went over the proofs about a month ago, I was like, oh my God, no, I gotta change this, I gotta change that, I gotta change that, and I'm like, well, wait, no, I mean, it is her voice, and I think that was a question. That's a question, because you want to respect the author's voice and their language, but you also want it to be, you want it to sound like an authentic work in its translated language too, because it is. It's its own authentic work. Let's
loop back to Amanda and Carrie, what you were trying to do with this balance of the authentic voice of Sandra and the authentic voice you two were trying to create in its English language new version, self-version, cloned version that is not a perfect.
I think I would say one, as much Lucempes as I have read, and now I've read a lot more, of Sandra. She also has a very particular French, at least in her poetry. I mean, she's quite eloquent when she writes her prose as well, when she does articles and things. But her poetry there's a poetics that's very, I mean, I would call it kind of, a spoiler, I guess, in our translator's note is that we identified it as a kind of clinical surrealism, because the language starts to take this, the images are broken and they're sort of repaired in the way that language and ancestry, when women's voices have been suppressed, have been fractured as we access them. And I feel like the English, some of what we were thinking about, Amanda, from like a theoretical side, but then coming into some of her own like poetics with things that are developing, and me trying to become more of an academic, sort of, not really, but being this person very connected to voice. I mean, America is kind of obsessed with finding your voice. I say that to my French students sometimes, and they don't get it, and it sounds too precious to them. I guess an edge of individualism that they can see has an American sort of tint to it. But in any case, I think we were okay with some of the stiltedness of a not literal translation, but just making sure it's important in Sandra's work to keep her really funky syntax and diction, which I think might, if you just look at it and you say like, well, that has to, I'm making it more readable is not at all the point of her poetics. So it just.
Right. Yeah. No, I would agree. I think she brings us to very complicated spaces and complicated images through complicated syntax and word choice. And we wanted to maintain that for sure. And there were on some occasions the temptation to simplify a little bit, or just to make the image clearer, because it was quite ambiguous for us. And so we left, and sometimes we would do that. Sometimes we would pull the image into something a little more clear for the reader, and then kind of compensate for it by choosing a stranger word or something. So it's kind of, working in the economy of the page or the particular poem to compensate for things that were maybe a bit of a stretch sometimes. Yeah.
In some ways that relates, it has to,
I think Fred, oh no, the book fell over. I think Fred, considering your experience, especially with the translation that you did out of German, which you don't speak, but also working with Michelle's work, which linguistically is very, very playful, that line of trying to decide, is it a direct translation or is it a translation of the original defining constraints that is what you're translating?
That's the question with the authenticity. What is authentic in the voice of a poet? If authenticity was just the meaning and translate the meaning, you can give that, you can fit deep L with that, and it will be the most authentic. I mean, with big most authentic translation you will have. It's not interesting at all. I mean, what is interesting is to determine what is important in the voice, in the spirit of the poem you translate. If metrics, images, sounds are not ornaments. I mean, they're ornaments, but they are as essential as the eventual meaning that is conveyed in the poem. So the thing is, and these parameters are always different from one poet to another. So we have to find what you feel, and for that it's a problem. So the lapsus, a poem is like a problem, and you have to find a solution when you translate it. If there's no real problem, I think it's dubious. I mean, it's something that is. I'm very suspicious about the fact that you can translate very easily something. You have to. It has to resist in a way.
A poem should be a problem.
Yeah,
is what you're saying. A poem should be a problem.
It can be a very simple problem that a 6 years kid can resolve because he has the imagination to do it. But it's interesting to the creativity you were asking in the title of this panel is is to find a solution that is that's a rendition of the authenticity of the voice and of what the poet put in his poem, in her poem. So yeah, for me it's, and when he does that with someone, it's great in a way that it can be the author, it can be someone else, because you don't have the perfect solution. Maybe you lose completely. You are blindsided by something, and the other person will say, "Hey, did you get that? That's the rhythm, this echo, or this meaning, all these parameters." When you discuss, as long as you respect and you're very confident with the other, it helps to dig the poem you're reading, you're translating, and to find the one great solution, one good solution for it.
Thank you. This is actually related very much to the reading last night that Frédéric, Michel, and Virginie did, in that it's really interesting for the audience to hear, and it's relatively rare to hear the poet reading their own work in a language they didn't write the work in. And so I was curious, just from the poet position, not the translator's position for a moment, how it feels to either just read it on the page or to perform that work in a language that is your second or third language. And I don't know if you guys have had that experience, but if so, I'd love it if you put your words in there too. So Virginie, can I pass this to you, or do you want a moment to consider, or what?
I'm trying to remember the first feeling I had when I discovered Michel's translation, and when I decided to put it out loud and to read it myself. It's like it's your poem, but it's beside you. It's like it's something next to you, but it's not exactly yourself. It's something. It's a bit awkward, but it's it's a great sensation. It's like you have to find a new entry to get in. You know, you have to find the door to open, where to go inside and say, okay, hey, okay, that's my word, that's what I was talking about. But it's not the first house is the second one. It's the second. It's like you entering a new place, and it's like you make it home, but you have to. It takes a little while to figure out how to make it comfortable and to find yourself at ease and to say, oh, okay, that's where I am. I found the second spot where I can be to find again the same sensation and the same emotion and what I was relating to in the first text. But actually, it works pretty well. And when I read last night about some excerpts from the unlikeness of things, it's really. I felt like I was home. I mean, I felt like it was my first home also, and I feel like you just have to practice the word the way that you enter into them and you make them yours once again. It's like it's a very nice experience, and it didn't happen quite often to me, so it was I quite like it, and now I feel like it's not my translation, but I make it myself, my words again when I was speaking them out loud.
I can speak to that a little bit, though I haven't been translated, but I've translated myself in my own writing practice, and I find that really interesting to be able to rewrite and to think about why you wrote what you wrote, potentially in anticipation of the future translation, which is an idea that I got from a poet, a Québécoise poet actually, Nicole Brossard, who's a writer that I worked on during my PhD, and she talked about writing in anticipation of the translations to come, meaning that she would sometimes choose words in her writing in French, thinking about how it would be translated in other languages. And that's a really kind of bilingual, multilingual imagination that I find is really fertile and interesting to write from. And I think all of us who live between languages, we do that without knowing it really, or why we chose a certain word, and then when you think about what that's going to be in another language, and you're like, oh,
interesting. That word was inside that other word I didn't know, and that means something probably to me that I didn't know I wanted to say, but it was there all along, and I find that very, very interesting.
Yeah, I agree with Virginie said. There's awkward quality of the translation, but I would say also that, for example, yesterday I didn't read in English, Michel did, but when I read, for example, translations by Zoe Scolding of Dirouf poems, I said, oh, it's so cool, oh, it's good. So I cried a little bit, and then I take the credit, but it's a recreation. For me, a translation is, especially in poetry, I'm a poet, I write in French, someone translated in German, English, Italian, I have different translations, and it's another work. I mean, it's a poetic work. I did translation too, so it's like a recreation. So it's cool because I take the credit, but it's me seen with the eyes, my poetry is seen by the eyes of someone else, and who is also a poet. It's not and that's part of the fun. It's a community. I mean, there's a passage between poets, so it's me and not me.
I have this quote that I actually, Michel, I know you have some thoughts on, that I think it relates to that idea that there are now two people having this mutual hallucination, for want of a better word, and I take that word very specifically from Chris Song, who's a professor of language studies up at University of Toronto. He used to work in Hong Kong. Chris Song writes, "The obsession with authenticity has plagued translators ever since translation came into being. I do think it's healthier for us to just embrace hallucination. Translation is hallucination. But it doesn't mean that hallucination is a bad thing. What's authentic to the author of the original poem is not what's authentic to the reader of its translation." So I wondered if anyone had some thoughts about the idea of this joined hallucination that the poet has created the poem, the translator participates in this creation that is then this new authenticity being given over to the reader of the translation. Do you have any thoughts on it?
Yeah, I have a few thoughts, but I'm not sure I'm going to be able to articulate them very well, or exactly with the question, the way you're addressing it. But yeah, authenticity. So I know we're talking about translating poetry, but I translate so much. I mean, I translate all the time, almost too much, and there's this constant need to get away from the French. Think about massaging the French out of what you're doing and getting rid of that French, to make it sound like something that's authentic in the translated language, in English. And so I guess, I don't know, I mean, I adapt for the film industry, so it is more of an adaptation, and I feel like translating poetry, I've brought that to it as well. Like, I don't want to say I disrespect the authenticity of the work, because I don't, but I think it needs to be, when you're translating, I think the authenticity has to be, you have to really focus on the authenticity of it as a translation.
As a process.
And as a process, and kind of let go of don't get so stuck in the shackles of the work, which is what was really fun with you to be able to do, when we could just be like, what are we talking about? And then like look and see the thing, and then like kind of rewrite it into, or like when you were translating, from Uncaged, Orcage that we read from last night. I mean, we live together, so we have this luxury, but he's like, what do you mean here? And I'm like, I don't mean anything, it just sounds good, I mean, it's a lot of it was not, I mean, that's that work, it was a lot of just kind of a lot of it's nonsense and it's just stuff that sounded good. And I'm like, I don't even care what you say, just make it sound, get those sounds to kind of bounce around. Make it something authentic that way. I don't know where hallucination comes in with that.
I don't know if I'm so comfortable with either the word authenticity or hallucination, though I get the parameters maybe necessary to just have neither of the words bring me to the ground. But I think it's interesting also to think of what translation seems to have done historically. I'm not a historian of translation studies, but sometimes when I think about authenticity and hallucination or other words that people have paired with the troubles of translation, which could be like loss. A lot of people will talk about the loss that's going to happen. And I definitely, because of the troubled relationship with my mother tongue, and a sense of betrayal there actually, but also not having authenticity in the language that I am often speaking in the place where I live now, and then in what I'm reading and feeling still like a little bit, I'm just not as adept or agile. But it's interesting to me to think about how many people in the past would spend years, like people were starting work on a translation of a text that they would do up until their death. I think we've really sped up the process, and I think I don't really like I like foreign language literature, I like reading translations, but I do think there's a marketing side to especially in English, foreign texts coming to the English language and the way that we're racing through them. And so I think authenticity and hallucination, and then the hallucination that we give to a public, who are the readers of that think that only one person can translate one person because there's rights issues all the time. And we can see, it's not true of people on this panel, I don't think, but we can see the marketing of the translator too as the expert or like gatekeeper of a certain person's work, which I find, yes, there are certain like trahison, what's the word? Betrayals. I've already said it again. Betrayal everywhere. Betrayals on the page, but those are usually, I think that for me, authenticity and hallucination don't come in as much as a thought, because I would never myself spend what I would think of as a reading time that becomes like an illuminated reading when it goes to translation, because it's an interpretation that you put on another surface. I don't really think of it so much as a recreation myself, but I think it's interesting to put that. For me, it's something that I'm trying to keep in perspective. And I don't know.
Yeah. About this allusion, when I was listening to all of you, I thought about a sentence by Oscar Pasteur. Pasteur said in the postface of a book, more or less, translation is the incorrect word for something that does not exist. And it was, of course, provocative, but in a way that the authenticity does not exist, because it's a question of recreation. So you always lose something in the process. But the thing is, what do you win in the process too?
I
think in a way, Carrie and Michelle were both also saying, what do you gain? It's not just the so-called betrayals and the so-called mistranslations. It's what are you embracing, what are you enlarging, going back to the Nicole Brassard idea that you have a word that has all these other words within it if you stretch it into other languages. Which is sort of wrapping up at this point. Virginie, do you want to add anything? And does anyone have any questions? Yes.
It's a tricky one to ask, but it's the one about hallucination. And hallucination really fascinates me because of the question of reading itself as a hallucination. So I'm thinking about two poems. One's low-hanging fruit, really. It's the Robert Frost poem, Two Roads Diverge, which my students all think means it's better to be an individual, because they have a hallucination about what that poem is saying. Or the Maggie Smith poem, The Bones. There was a collective United States hallucination of the healing power of a poem about lines or cans of real estate post the Orlando disaster. So there's a way in which reading is always potentially a hallucination, and I'm interested in how that interacts with the translation hallucination.
So your question is, reading itself is a kind of hallucination. There is that argument that, you, as a writer, you put this thing out into the world, and then people make of it what they will, and sometimes you think, all right, wouldn't have guessed that. But you no longer have control of it once it's in the world, and as Laura was saying, you might have an entire mass of people who decide it means this one thing, but does it really, or is that just a mass hallucination? How do people feel? Does that also equally apply to translation? Does it apply more to translation?
Thoughts?
For myself, I would just say it's more to have a vision than an hallucination. Hallucination, you kind of elaborate things that doesn't exist. But a vision is something who actually it extends what you see, and you go all the way through what the words are saying. And the idea when you translate is, not translate, when you read first the text in English, or in French, whatever you're going to be translating, is to go as deep as you can in this text, as deep as you can in the vision you can have of the text, as deep as you can get in the vision of the text you think the author had. For me, it's like getting a submarine and going deep into the sea, and going as deep as you can to discover all the aspects and all the qualities and secrets and magic you have in the text. And it's more like to explore it and not hallucinate. Hallucination for me is like you get off control and you just you lose touch with your reality. And it's not that. It's really to be as close as you can in contact with the core of the text itself. That's what I would say.
Anything else to Amanda? Or yes.
When you mentioned the possibility of readers running away with the meaning of a text, right? I think that does happen a lot, and sometimes it's fine. That's the point of reading in a way, to be able to find, see yourself and see what you need to see in a thing, but also respecting what the author wanted to say. So it's always, and in translation, we're really in between those two poles of potential appropriation and respect, or extreme respect for someone, or admiration that maybe is almost too strong that we don't dare intervene. So finding the fine line between those two risks, I think, is what we try to do in translation. And in translation, we're held to the standard of fidelity, faithfulness to the original. So kind of trying to define what that means is also how we define how we end up translating, I think. And what you were mentioning earlier about, what do we translate? That's also the question always. And I feel like when I've done some just kind of experimental translation more for research, I try to seek within the text cues as to how the text wants to be translated. So oftentimes for multilingual writers or experimental writers or people writing and thinking in multilingual spaces and potentially about translation, those cues are very obvious, and they say, well, this person believes this about translation, so I'm going to try to do, and then I'll try to do what I'm doing in that direction. And in some ways I do think that works can call for their own translations and call on us in certain ways to continue on in a different form, but one that is respectful and continues the work. I think translation is a continuation of the original.
Yeah, and also maybe it happens to you if you're poets, that someone comes to you who has read your work in the original language and said, "Oh, I get it. You meant that," and you never thought about it. You never. It's not so the reader hallucinates in a good way, because at one part of the poetic work, in my opinion, is to create the conditions that it can be interpreted in multiple ways, and it talks to you in a different way than to, yeah. And so if it does that in your original language, there's no problem that some translator put things as a reader, and the readers of the translation put things that were never in mind, nor the translator, nor the poet. So it's, yeah, hallucination is collective.
I know there are some questions over here. We are, in theory, we have to get out of here. So I'm wondering if you could take the questions just to the corner of the stage while we sort of clear the room a little bit. Thank you so much. I'm really sorry to cut things off. Really appreciate your time. Frédéric Fortin, Amanda Murphy, Carrie Chappell, Michel Noboom, Virginie Poitrasson. Look for their work. They're all amazing poets and translators.